Hi all, I'm Vijay Jethani. So for today's session, which is session 5, we have developed a security and compliance plan. Okay, so till now we have covered the above, that is design and implement process and communication, source control strategy, and build and release. We divided into 3 and 4th session so that you can understand and do the labs properly. Okay, so now in 5th session, we are going to cover security and compliance plan. And the last session will be on instrumentation strategy. That is nothing but your monitoring strategy. Okay, for DevOps. So as you know, this is a exam session. So what we are going to do, as we have done in our previous session, is to set up the context and give you the hands-on labs. Okay, because that will help you to make the decision and also give you hands-on practice on whatever you do in DevOps in and out. Okay, so let's move to the agenda for security and compliance plan. Now, if you see this module, we have design and implement authentication and authorization method. That is the section 1 of, or you can say section A of this particular session. And then design and implement strategy for managing sensitive information and automation. That is the second part. And third part is automate security and compliance scanning. Now, to break this into the 3 sections, the first part will deal mostly with how you create an identity. Now, this identity is different than your own user identity because this will be used to automate your DevOps. Okay, so if you see the service principal and manage identity, here we are purely talking about Azure. Okay, similarly, second line, if you see GitHub Apps, GitHub token, and personal access token, here we are purely talking about GitHub identities. Okay, and third line, if you see, is more of a DevOps service connection, Azure DevOps service connection, and personal access token. Here we are talking of Azure DevOps in particular. Okay, so we will cover this in depth, and there are small labs you can do while you do, and I will provide you the link how you can do that. So idea is, while this is not a practical exam, you don't have any practical exam for this, but while you learn this and set your context right on Azure DevOps, it will be helpful for you in your practical implementations to know that. And most of you might already be doing this in and out while implementing your Azure or any of your cloud. Okay, so that is the reason this will set a context for creating an identity in respective cloud providers, or I would say a DevOps environment. Also, you need to know about how do we permission or how do we give access, like read, write, and all those things within GitHub. Similarly for Azure DevOps, and at at bare minimum, or I would say at an organization level or enterprise level, how these permissions vary. So that is how you will see for access level stakeholders in Azure DevOps and outside collab. So this is pretty much you have in part A of this particular session. And then once you move to implementing in strategy, this is more on how you give a least privilege access. Okay. Also, how you store your credentials so that those are not leaked. Also, while you may know or may not know, and unintentionally you may leave some credentials behind, which can create a problem for you. So how you save these from the sensitive information from getting leaked is we'll cover in this particular. And finally, how do we automate this process, right? So as you are already aware that advanced security is the session we have covered in past. So most of the GitHub and Azure DevOps, you will cover all those code scanning, dependent bot alerts, and all those things. Okay, so you have to go back and really recollect from those session what we covered in depth, because that was in depth session, and it was also an exam oriented session. So I've covered almost everything whatever is required from this uh, for advanced security. Okay, so third session, which is a section automate security and compliance scanning. Now here, apart from Defender for cloud security, okay, we are not going to cover anything in this particular section, because whatever you see compliance scanning, secret and license scanning along with GitHub Advanced, that we already covered in our advanced security exam session. So I would suggest you to refer to that so that we give some time back, also provide you the hands-on you can do while going through this particular section. Okay, so let's get started what we have as part of section A, and then we will go for section B and finally the section C. Okay, so now let's look at what we have as part of authentication and authorization methods. Okay, now at first place, what is manage identity versus service principle? Now, in bare minimum, you have to understand that there is some identity which we are going to use for automation of our DevOps. Okay. Now, what is the difference between identity versus service principle? So, any identity which we create, okay, for authentication as a programmatic access to your APIs, or I would say which can work without you being there. Okay, so these kind of identities we use for service automation. Okay, now while you create an service principal versus identities, okay, there is a bare minimum layer, or I would say a base layer, which is identity. On top of that, you actually have your service principles built on. So that means what I'm trying to say here is, and there will be something already registered as an app registration or enterprise registration. And then on top of that, you as a cloud provider provide the managed identities. Okay. So bare shell is some identity, and on top of that, you will provide a managed identity because you being cloud provider, you want to manage the secrets of that particular identity or how that rotation happens. That is purely controlled by you. Now, when to choose service principal versus the identities is what we will look into this. So let's first go through these bulleted points of service principal. Now, if you see service principal, they represents an application or service. That's correct because we want to automate. So obviously we will do some app registration for that service principal, and that will be used only for that. And that will be used to provide access to environment where we will use this service principal. Now, example I can give you is of an Azure, where I will create a service principal and give access to this service principal to some service, right? I will give this identity access on any particular service. Okay, so this is done. Now, whether this can be service principal can be used outside Azure, yes, it can be used for any other cloud providers, provided you have a federation on that particular cloud, or this particular IAM is available, that is from an authentication per se, that is available in that particular cloud provider. That means they know Azure Active Directory, then only you can use that as a service principal, right? Otherwise, let's say Azure, you are restricted only to Azure. If you are using AWS, then that is AWS related identities. So this can happen, but here to give you an idea of service principle, if we have a federated identities which know each other, or I would say across cloud, then we can provide an access whether it is an on-premise or other cloud providers. Okay, so you have to make this point very clear for service principle. And then requiring the manual credential management. Why we require this is because this is not managed by our cloud provider. We have created this and registered this for use in any of on-premise or any other clouds, right? So that is where we have to take an overhead of managing those secrets ourselves. Providing a granular and access level. Now, again, it purely depends upon what APIs are exposed by your cloud provider. Azure will have its own APIs or permission management system. Similarly, AWS will have its own, or any other on-premise will have its own. So based on the IAM, that is an identity and access management. Okay. So if you know that, then those particular access levels and permissions you can manage in that particular cloud provider. Okay. And as you clearly know that we are doing this for our DevOps. So obviously it should be also helpful for us in automating our DevOps process using pipelines, scripts, or any third-party application. So this is a brief of service principle. Okay. Now on top of this, what I want to try build is what is system managed identities. Creating this, but now this will be created by your Azure. Okay. If it is created by an Azure, obviously I want to make sure that Azure VM, function app, or any other particular application which is a native cloud provided application that is managed using this identity. Okay, so that is where I'm saying system managed identity. Life cycle is tied to resource and deleted. That's correct because I'm only using for, or I would say this is created from within that application so that it is managed, or I would say life cycle is managed while the resource is alive. Okay. Credential management already taken care of. Handles the rotation because I'm using an Azure for that. So Azure will take care of that. And finally, your ideal for single resource application, that is go without saying because we already have VM and function app or similar kind of applications which wants to have system managed identities. Okay, so clear till now. I think moving to user managed identities. Now here, apart from managing, I also want to make sure I can use this identity which I'm creating for any other applications within Azure. Okay, so that is where if you see it is created as a standalone Azure resource. That means I'm going to just go in app registration and have that available for me whenever I want to consume from a Azure. Now again, coming back to the same point which I made earlier is it purely depends upon your cloud provider or where you are registering. If they know IAM or Azure Active Directory, then only they will be able to see this as an service principal there, and you will be able to provide access. Here you are providing access to only Azure using user assigned managed identities. Okay, so be clear on the service principle where you were able to use that in any other clouds provided they know I am from federated identity per se. But here as a user assigned managed identity, it is purely restricted to your Azure resources at this point of time. Okay. So it provides centralized identity for multiple resource, flexibility in scenarios involving shared identity, and finally an identity lifecycle of specific resource. Again, credential management as an Azure handles it because again rotation of the you are not doing any secrets changing or rotation of that. So again, it is managed by an Azure. Hence, it is called user managed identities. Okay. So I will just pause here for a while. So you go through this and then we will move further. Okay, so coming to the user manager as well, so that you can have a look at that as well. Okay, so for this, you can also have a lab. Now, let me walk you through the lab. So if you clearly see that whatever we have said at this point of time, okay, so it gives you the benefits of service principal managed identities. If you go through this as a the refresher for you, what we just covered, but directly getting into the lab from here is what you want to try. Okay, so you start with your identity the way we started. Okay, and you just go on intranet admin center app registration, and then you move on with creating your own identities. You can Here you are starting with service principal, then you are going in option B as a manage identities, and then accordingly you are giving access to the users. So if you try this more, I think it's sufficient for you to understand the basics of an identity versus service principal. Okay, so make sure you understand or have a difference between service principal and manage identities. Okay, so that's all about this lab, but it will take hardly 15 to 20 minutes if you try out and you are already aware of this. Okay, so just go through that lab and try it out. Okay, now first, whatever we are trying out here, this was mainly on manage identity and service principal, which was more on Azure focus, how you actually register your identity. Now let's move on to how the GitHub look like. Okay, now personal access tokens. So as it clearly says, personal access tokens, that means obviously they are only for me. Okay, they will be tied to your account. If your account is deleted, your access tokens are also gone. Okay, but this is used to an extent where depending upon how you provide permissionings, like while it started, I think if you can go to the GitHub and click on your profile settings, you will find the developer settings at the left hand side. Okay, and similarly, if you click on personal access token, you will be given two options of token classic versus fine ground, and you click on generate new token. So I will show you this while I'll show you the permissioning system. Okay, so there you can see how you can create this from a developer settings and you generate the token. This is very straightforward. So that is the reason I'm not directly jumping now. Once I covered this GitHub part, I will show you that. Okay, so this is the bare minimum which you need to know for creating a personal access token. But what exactly is the challenges with this? The challenges is this. This can provide me a whole lot of permissions which I may not need. That is the reason there is a difference between fine grain versus token classic. Now, token class is actually meant to give you even full access to whatever you are trying to do. And they, as being classic, I think the API level access were not available at that point of time. Or I would say, if I want to give access to an organization versus repository, I cannot do at that point of time. So while fine grain enterprise has grown through, I can actually select whether I want to give a permission on an organization versus repository versus a specific only pull request versus an actions. So I can really call out in fine grain tokens that yes, I only want access to this. So personal access tokens are tied to you and they can only be used by you in your, and accordingly you scope the permission based on how you provide the permissioning. Okay, so that's all in personal access token. Now what are the GitHub apps? Now if you see GitHub apps, they are more advanced version of the way you look at the providing an API access, and very much secure in terms of how you want to access it, because now it is not available to everyone who to use your account, or I would say use your tokens in some shape and for automating the GitHub actions or something of that sort. Now in GitHub apps, as you see, they are kind of an API. Okay, it is an app. Okay, so they can be installed on your repository or an organization with set of permissions. And this is the practical way of doing for your future enterprise integrations. That means if I want to really have any product which runs on any particular cloud. Now in this session at end we will going to cover the Defender. There you will see we while we do the GitHub integration, we are actually creating the GitHub app, which will give you the granular permissions to your GitHub ecosystem. Okay, that means for getting the monitoring done or security done, I need some permissions to get the data from GitHub. So for that, I need to install the GitHub app. Okay, so we will look into that. But at this point of time, understand this is the preferred way of how you do the integrations using APIs. Okay, now so with that, I think if you look at from where you will get again, you have to go your profile settings, developer, GitHub apps, and new GitHub app. is what you will go and create. But here you will need some more details on how you will giving the home page URL, webhook settings and permissions. As I said, permissions will not be the important thing is to look at homepage URL and webhook settings. That is where I listen. Okay, again I'm coming to the API part. Webhook is something where should I listen is what will give from this webhook URL. Okay, so that is where you have to see while I pull that while installing the GitHub, the actual data will be from this webhook settings, which will actually pull the data and bring it to an Azure for Defender, which we already discussed. Okay, and then while you deploy, you can deploy this on organization versus repository level. Again, fine graining, which I talked about, a specific level access, so that we are not giving what is only the least privilege access. Okay, so that is how the GitHub apps is different from your personal access token, which can give more permission, or I would say this is only the developer method to just try out something. But as you go to the enterprises, you need a GitHub app to getting integrated into your enterprise ecosystem. Okay, now there is also GitHub token. Now, as you see, this GitHub token is only available for your workflow. Why we need that? So we need that because while we run the GitHub actions, okay, now this workflow will need to move your code from GitHub to your machine, which will be running this as a automation, right? So that is how we run some code, and then we come out with the what is an output of that. Like while you run the GitHub actions, you will create some package out of it, or you will do some build part of it, you will do some test part of it. For that, GitHub token is very useful because this is only available during this workflow time when the workflow is initiated till the workflow ends. So while you do that, if you see secrets or GitHub token within the workflow, it has permission limited to the repository where the workflow is running and expire when the job finishes or maximum of 24 hours. So this is important while you are running in GitHub action. I need a workflow to have an access to the machine, but how the machine will get an access using this particular GitHub token? It works as a username and then password. Username can be a repository and password will be actually the GitHub token. So that is how it works behind the scenes. Okay. So you should be aware of this as an from an concept per se, why we actually have the GitHub token, not the personal access token or GitHub apps for this particular workflow run. Okay. So with this second section, again, I will second topic, I will just pause here so that you go through this and then we move further. And as it is straightforward, that is the reason, as I said, I will show you at the end what you can do with this particular settings. Okay, so here comes GitHub Apps and GitHub token. Okay, so now coming to Azure DevOps. Now, first section, or in this section, we covered first part on Azure, then we covered GitHub. Now we are covering Azure DevOps. Now, similar to whatever you have seen a service connection, exactly the same service connection, only now this service connection will create the identity automatically at the backend and then provide an access to your Azure DevOps based on the resources which you want to use. Now, let's try to understand what we're trying to say here is. So at first place, you go to the Azure DevOps projects and project settings. Obviously, you need a project for that. So I think I will not go into the what is a project setting because in previous session you might be now aware of where you have to look for this. you have to go to the service connection, and under pipelines you have to choose service connection. Now if you remember in Azure, while we were running the pipelines and everything, we actually created this service connection and provided an Azure resource manager access and selected a subscription, and that is how we actually automated, or I would say after build is completed, that is how we actually deploy our application on the Azure. Okay, so we are very well aware of this, and these are the straightforward things. Only thing from a security per se, this is how the Azure DevOps looks like from the uh, authenticating to your Azure. We created an authentication method. It gives us a resource manager. We set up the parameters, and finally we see the what is the name of our. And there was also a small tick at the bottom while creating service, whether you want to give to only one particular pipeline or you want to give to all pipelines, where we selected all, because at while trying this lab we actually want to have all our pipelines run using the same account. But it is not hard and fast. You can go and run with because different teams will use the different accounts or service connection. Okay, so make sure you are giving a proper access to the pipelines which you own, rather than giving access to any other pipeline. Okay, so you can click and verify. Again, being this straightforward, already doing the we are already doing the release pipeline and the build pipeline, so I'm not going to go into most detail, but just for your information, this is how it is. Okay, so service connection, again, manage identity, everything taken care by an Azure, everything goes in here. Okay. Now there's another part which is again tied to you as your account, which is again personal access token, which we call the PAT. Now, if you have any time even clone your private repository from GitHub to Azure DevOps or Azure DevOps to GitHub, you might have used personal access token, right? So that is where I think this comes into picture, where you know that this particular token is the only way in which you can authenticate and can clone your repository across. So that is where you use this new token and then have configuration, create new token and have that saved as a password. And once you actually try to clone your repository from an organization or even standalone repository, you should use this token which is tied to your account and get your work done of cloning or whatever you want to do from this particular while integrating both Azure DevOps and GitHub together. Okay, you create it and obviously uh, and have a copy of this or saved in somewhere, because this is only available while you create it. Okay, so this is what you see from an Azure DevOps per se. Okay, so with this, if you see, we have covered the first three topics. Okay, now let's move into the actual permissioning. Okay, now if you see at if I want to really look at from the roles per se, I'm just directly jumping here in the roles. I will also show you the what organization roles look like in how the repository. Now for this, I have already available to me the my organization, where you can directly jump in to see the organization roles. Okay. Now within an organization, what I can have is what is listed here. I want to have a complete read of a repository, right? Triage. Now I will just show you what the triage means. Just give me some time. So read, write, triage, maintain, admin is what you see as a role management functions along with app manager, CI/CD, and security manager. Now if you see this, these are pretty much the way I was talking you about API, a very well created roles which will provide me only the permission which I needed. Okay. Now, if you see coming to the repository roles, then you will understand that what I was trying to say is for a read. A read will only read and clone and have a open and comment on issues and pull requests. This is what I can do max. Triage can give read plus I can manage issues and pull requests. That means I should be able to close and manage or even pull request with this triage. What it is not giving us is a right to your repository. So that will come with the right permission. So try it plus read and clone is what giving the repository. And finally, maintain is giving me kind of a modify permission. Okay, without providing anyone access to this. I can manage anything and everything in and out without giving anyone access to this. admin gives me full access, including providing permissions and taking any destructive actions of even deleting the repositories. Okay, so this is what the roles you look like. And then with that, I think you can correlate here, coming back, what this means for repository read, write, maintain, admin. Okay, now with this, you will be able to manage most of your repository. This with this, all of your GitHub apps. So GitHub Apps, as I said, is an API which will provide access to your repositories or organization. That is where the app manager comes into picture. Okay. So this is app, nothing but GitHub App Manager. Okay. Now CI/CD admin. Why we need this? This is basically providing you an access using action policies, runners, runner groups. Now, again, going to each API level of fine grace access control, because now you are in an organization. So you need this rather than one person or a group of team running this. You need all these things while running an enterprise. Security manager is also important because I want to have this role separate for which who will give the permissioning, have some security alerts created. So this is where this particular security manager will take care for providing the relevant access for the organizations and repositories. Okay. Now we understand organization roles. We understand what the repository roles are. Finally, we will see the member privileges. Okay. Now base, anything and everyone will guess without giving any permissions. But if you want more, I think you can click on whether you want read, write and admin. Okay. No permissions also the way you can have, but by default you get read. Also, while you create a repository, this can be public, private and internal. Internal is internal to your organization. Private is where you will invite, and public is available for the way you have in your. Apart from this, you also have an outside collaborator, similar to what you have in your public repositories. So that is what you can do. So from permissioning system and the roles, I think let's move back to where we were. Okay, so let's go back here. So now we will understand what we're trying to make use of this permissioning and roles in GitHub. Okay, so these were the predefined roles we have already seen. We have seen the repository with read, write, try, maintain, and admin. And at the organization level, you have owner, billing, and with each has specific permissions with organization itself. Okay, so this is at an organization level, and this is with the based on what we want to make the access for repository. Now, apart from this, you can also create a custom organization repository roles, because as I said, this is an API driven. I can really pick out only on GitHub Actions, only on this. I can really do that. So that is where this custom roles come into picture. And similarly, the repository roles. I can clearly give them read and write together, then giving them modify. That's purely in our hand and how we take care of that. Okay. So these are with the organization repository roles. There's also the team. While this is not we have talked about, but if you want a team based access control, this also you can create. So this is an organization. Now instead of looking at rather than just an organization, we can have all each teams. So this is kind of a even subdivision of how you look at from only your team. Okay, exactly same thing. No need to look at another more. You will all have read, write, and then triage, modify when admin. Okay, so these are the permissions you will again will look at. But from the team level, I think to an individual repository, the access goes same. You don't have to worry about like how these permissions for specific repositories or projects. Okay, because here it will be only for a group of people, or the way you created a small group, this will be only for that particular group, and you will go to the read, write and admin to the individual repository, allowing the segregation of what you want. Okay, so remember this, these permissioning and the roles you should have, and in an exam this will be you should be very clear on whether we are talking about an organization level, whether we are talking at repository level, or whether we are talking at the team level. So that is what it will test you on. Okay, and if you do the hands-on lab, I think in exam it will be very clear on what exactly you are achieving out of it. Okay, now coming the same thing coming to an Azure DevOps. Now, if you have seen Azure DevOps, while we were working with this creation of our repositories and even in the GitHub Actions, we were dealing with all of these, right? So if you have seen Azure boards, we were dealing with work items, we were dealing with how they will be scheduled and what time they will be available, whether they are in action. So those all I think we have already seen in our session 1. Okay, and session 2 repositories and everything we covered. 3 and 4 we covered build and release pipeline. So these all whatever we are looking at from an organization per se, what we have from an inheritance or a project level is what we will get anything and anything around pipelines and resources within that project. Okay, so that is what it is written here. Again, it will have uh, all allow bit different than what you have for the GitHub, but I think the message goes same for the permissioning. Okay, there are default groups. The way you have read, write, and they have readers, contributors, and project administrator. So again, I'm not going into detail because while going through our actual resources, or I would say a project creation in our second session, we covered almost everything, how the structure look likes and everything. Okay, so custom group at organization and collection level, users, role base, object level. Now, when I say object level, again, this is an API based access to what you want to access, whether you want to access a repository, whether you want to access your pipelines, whether you want to access the board, or what you want to access from a project management per se. You can exactly pinpoint where you want to have a permission. Branch policies, I think we pretty much seen how we can restrict during pipeline and release stage, how we can restrict the others to actually promote the code to the production. Okay, that is where the branch policies are very important, so that without review nothing goes into your Azure DevOps is what you will see. Okay, similarly the service connections. Now service connection we have already seen above, exactly the same thing it is talking about here. So at the end of the day, what you are looking at is permissioning model of Azure DevOps. How, and this is what you need to know from an exam per se. What the Azure is all about, what the GitHub is all about, and the Azure DevOps. These are three entities you will have a look and feel of a permissioning right from an identity or a service connection, or even talking about a GitHub apps. Okay. So now moving ahead, if you really want to create this as a security group, this is again step by step. You can go and directly have the labs. These are the small labs which you can try it out. Just sign on to your organization, have a custom security group created within your project is how you will do, or if you are doing at an organization level, this is how you have to do. The steps remain same. So these are the small snippets of how you do that. Okay, that is the reason I am not directly going to the Azure DevOps and show you these step. Wherever it is possible for me to show you the direct steps directly, I'm showing you here only. Okay, so I will pause here for a while before we move further. Okay, so now this was for creating new, but what if we want to modify permission? That is also here. You just have to go to the respective whether you are doing at the repository level or at the organization level, just go and have that and permission setup and click on that modify, and then select whether you want to allow deny for that respective permissioning. So instead of directly selecting in GitHub, you have a read, write, and it gives you access to that. But here you want to go to each and every settings and set allow, deny, non-set. Not set means it is by default will flow from an organization. Okay, so changes will be automatically saved after exiting that. Okay, now the way you have seen in GitHub, there is also a license level access depending upon what license you have. So a stakeholder will have the free and offer limited to private projects, nearly full access to the public. And you can, while you buy out the license, you will have a basic license or basic plus test license. So this is how from the licensing also in Azure DevOps we have a permissioning system. Okay, so I've just written down what it is best for and features, what it will give you. Limitations, you cannot access code repository in private projects with this. Okay, but if I go with the from the basic 5 users are free and subsequent users can have incur cost per month. So this is what the basic will look like. Test plans, obviously, if you have the test plan lesson, then only you will be able to use basic the test cases or the test use cases and test plan and test use cases, both of them. Okay, so this is what you have for the this licensing type. You also have a Visual Studio subscriber, which grants you some features of Visual Studio subscription. So these are the, to be frank, this is for knowing from a license person. That is the reason we have written free. Then you have some kind of access, or here you are limited to only the internal to repository and what all you can do within that. But if you want to have test plans and test cases, then obviously you need basic plus test plan. And finally moving to the similarly, GitHub Enterprise by default, I think the licensing varies based on whether you want to have an example from advanced security. You can't run code scanning without having the advanced security enabled. Uh, so enterprise licensing also has different flavors, and advanced security similarly what you have from the AI per se. So those copilot is what I'm talking about. You need to buy a specific license which is per user for that. Okay, so that is how the licensing also create a access levels. Okay, now outside collaborators, it is, I think most of from a public repository which you are creating. Anything if I want to use for anyone else doing the work on my repository, I need to have an outside collaborator role for that, and that is what they are going to do. So this can work with repositories or with organizations as well. Okay, the way I have shown you in clearly in our permissioning system, we can really give them read, write, and admin. Okay. So till here, I think we pretty much covered what was for authorization and authentication, right? So I'm just coming back to what we covered as of now. We covered first part of section A, which is authentication and authorization. So we gone to an Azure, then GitHub, Azure DevOps, and see the permissioning of all of them. Okay. Now let's move to this. How do we create a strategy for sensitive information? Okay. So let's move on. Okay, so in section B, what we have is till now we were only considering an authentication mechanism, whether in Azure, GitHub, or the Azure DevOps. But what about applications? Applications will have respective secrets, they will have certificates. Similarly, we need to integrate with them. How do we use them? Have the secrets retrieved at runtime? That is where Azure Key Vault comes into picture. So if I say you like Azure, I give you an overview of Azure Key Vault as a service, you will understand pretty much everything what it is meant for and what is how it is going to help you in your overall application deployment as well as retrieving of your secrets. So if you see authentication, this is for all managed identity service principal and certificates. Access control, obviously, want to have role-based access control or some kind of policies where I want to make sure that secrets are only retrievable by someone I know or organization can trust that person, right? Secrets management, key management. So secrets and keys are two different things. Secrets is more of a password, key is more of like connection string along with any particular key value pairs I want to store. Okay, so make sure you understand the difference between two. Certificate is obviously to represent someone as a person or or a machine, some identity given which knows that yes, this is how and this is a secure and I'm talking to a right person or right identity. Okay. Data protection again, while these keys are being rotated, how I want to make sure that they are being purged at right time, similarly how they are rotated. Okay, so that is where, and obviously everything and everything, anything around authentication, access control, I need to have logging and monitoring. So that is what it gives you. So again, for this also I have just kept one lab. So if you go to that lab, first of all, it gives you in and out of what it is, the way we have seen in our other labs also. Then finally, from the how you deploy this, I think I will directly jump to show you what you can make of this. First is understand this, then directly jump to any one particular service. I would say better to try out Azure App Services as well as your Kubernetes services, because this will make you sure that you create a web app on your own. Okay, there are step by step instructions create given, and then you create a key vault, create a secrets, and then you retrieve those secrets. Okay, anything and everything on the permissioning, what you need on that, how you actually get the secrets, everything is given here. Okay, you actually will see whether the secrets are retrieved the from the complete application lifecycle. Similarly, is for your Kubernetes. If you directly go to integrate this, you have to create first of all drivers. This is nothing but the way you have a resource manager. This is the driver for your secrets, which understands those binaries. Okay, so you actually have to install them. Make sure you create a key vault before and have the roles and permissions created, and then you move on to creating Kubernetes service and use those secrets within those containers. So if you even do these two as a lab exercise, I think you will understand complete in and out of how Azure Key Vault is used within these services. Okay, so that it was the main reason of keeping this as a lab. So you understand in and out of using the Azure Key Vault. Okay, now moving ahead with secure strategy for deployment. Now this topic is more theoretical. Why theoretical? Because you know almost all the things. The only thing is you have to have a right strategy in place. So that is where I think this clearly calls out design and implement secure strategy. This is more of having a right approach for the enterprise for your deployment. First thing is embrace DevSecOps principles. That means SecOps. Just think about security. Shift left should start right from a development so that you don't have to pay it at end. Okay. Automation. Everything and anything, whether my secrets, uh, I am compliant with whatever with industry standards, even doing the right things. So that is where secret scanning and compliance checks are there within your pipeline as well. Collaboration, that means right from my development, moving to the build, then test, and then release, all and everything around DevOps with security baked in is what you see here. Okay, everyone shares the responsibility right from a developer to someone who is implementing and releasing my applications. Okay, so I need to follow that. Obviously, this feedback should go in if something is not working, is where the continuous monitoring comes here. This is, I think you and me know this from beginning. If you are doing this as a DevOps, I think it is nothing but a DevOps life cycle with security baked in right from beginning is what this is all about. Okay, now if you are creating with the service principle, I think you are already having a role-based access control. Okay, remember that you have already done that. Only thing you don't need this, or only you don't know this, that you are already doing it. So it gives you a permissioning on your Azure, so that while you run the pipeline, you are able to deploy on the way we have selected, right? I need what when I select subscription, it asks me Azure resource as a resource manager. That means whatever I want to do, the deployment on that particular Azure, I go to that subscription and give access to that particular service principal, giving the only the contributor permission and not the owner permission. Okay, so that is where you are already aware of, or even I can restrict even to a particular service as well. If I clearly know that this is a service I'm going to, so that is where role-based access control comes into picture. So you are already aware of that. With the help of service principal, you have already done that. Now coming to secure the secrets management. Now if you have seen in Azure Key Vault, you have a specific access policies. I think the lab before which I've shown you, you will also have access policies while you create an Key Vault. That access policy is nothing but giving you an access to read from those Azure Key Vault. So that is what they are talking here. Okay. Again, least privilege for service connection. We already talked about this is again same thing. But in case of federation, you need to make sure that that third party also have the granular or fine grain access control before you can provide permission. But if it is just the basic, I think you need to be aware of what you will lose or what more access you are giving to that particular. So in security, I think you should be very well aware of identity you are using and whether that is with used within your particular cloud provider, or that is a first party, or you can use it for third party. That you should be aware of before using those credentials. Okay, so agent pools is how you do for giving only to the machines. Okay, make sure the machines are clean. That means I think the good example for this is your GitHub token. It is only given for workflow and the machines it will access. It will not be able. Similar is for your Azure DevOps machines. If you have selected Microsoft hosted agents or hosted pools, you are giving the clean machine every time and on which your pipeline is run. So there is no backlog the way we have. There's no security thing to check for the way we have in self-hosted agents. So remember, this is how you secure a CD/CD pipeline. This is not, but you don't have to implement big tools, but having a right strategy, a right identity with a right permissioning, it will give you all these in place. So you just be from an example say you need to be aware of these basics. Okay, so that is what I am just insisting again and again. Secret scanning. I, while you have an advanced security enable, you will come to know that it is also scanning for secrets into your pipelines, into your repositories, or any pipeline is accessing those, so that you are taking care of that. Now, what else you should know? You should know static application security testing, because in build and test, I think we clearly called out what was static application, what was dynamic, and then these are the different tools at the different stages which you use during build and test. Okay. Similarly, the infrastructure as code using to get an audit templates. Okay, being verified before it's being deployed. Security gates. I think in release we clearly called out security gates. We have clearly marked, make sure that this should be present and this should be available before we say that we are okay to release. There should not be any issues or anything raised while we do build and test and then test it thoroughly before we release it for an approval during security gates. This clearly we have seen in our release pipeline stages. Okay, so just recollect whatever we have done in past and then build your story similarly on top of this. Okay, now here I think we did for securing CI/CD pipeline. Now what we look from an application and infrastructure. Now this is where we are getting more into an Azure services. Okay, now this is where how an application, these are bare minimum basics you already aware of. That means it should, while a transit and at rest, what kind of encryption methodology it should have. And similarly, by with the right level of access, I think you prevent the injection attacks like SQL injection or any vulnerabilities you may see. Similarly, for your infrastructure as code, you do the version control, right? So you know that today I have included this more services or features, or I would say even getting the monitoring in place, right? So you start with a small uh, resource manager, or I would say a resource group for that particular service, and slowly you build upon the different layers of your application, and then finally come to that stage. So this is where we are talking about a version control, so that at any point of time, if any service fails, I think you are very well aware of what's going wrong. Otherwise, your infrastructure as a code templates will go like you have to start it again. Again, you have to start from scratch, which will not give you that benefits which we are looking from the pipelining or infrastructure as a code templates. Okay. Whether you are using Terraform or ARM templates, I think this goes with everything. Small snippets, or I would say module by module, is you have to build upon. And while you build that, I should again least privilege everything. So those all things, I think you are aware of that. Just make sure you understand and provide only the access required. Okay. So similarly, the container security, so that it is only being accessed, it like someone is not hitting that at regular intervals for pulling the images 1,000 times. So make sure that it is restricts that image can be pulled for only that particular limit. Okay, so that is where you will set. Similarly, from network security, see, this is more to do with your, whether you are using an on-premise, whether you are using Azure, whether you're using AWS, make sure you understand your application and infrastructure, how your network is set up, how your storage is set up, how your machines or even the PaaS services set up, and make sure while they integrate, they know or use the credentials which gives a least privilege access to do only the job they want to do, so that you can prevent all of whatever we are saying here from that particular attacks. Okay. Now monitor and audit. Okay. So while we clearly call out the activities which we do as a developer or as a day-to-day operation, we clearly also want to log the audit logs for even admins who are doing or changing the permissionings or even creating any structure or strategy. So that is where we want to have auditing enable. Continuous monitoring from an Azure monitor, you already aware of that it has a SIM model built in, where you can centralize the logging and real-time alerts. Similarly, while you do the audits, you need to identify and remediate the vulnerabilities. That means if you see whatever we're talking about in previous check marks and whatever, I think in previous here you are seeing Sonar Club check marks. So ideally what we are doing, trying to do here is we are trying to remediate whatever we are trying to do as a part of our real-time protection. Okay, and remediating along with industry standards. So this is what I think you should understand while applying the strategy for having I think securing your application infrastructure. Okay, so coming to the employee training and awareness, now this is again bare minimum. uh, you want to educate developers, I would say we want to educate everyone in and around which are involved in cycle. Similarly, we know the about the security of our culture looks like and emphasizing on how this looks different. Okay, like organization to organization, you have to adopt something and adapt to your standards of how the security is baked in at each level while you do the DevOps as whole. Okay, so that is what the trade is all about. So this was knowing DevOps and what you are aware. Now the next topic of leakage and sensitive prevent leakage sensitive information. This is more of giving you the how to do it. Okay. You put a appropriate labeling, which information is available for which users. And like I would say, I will divide this in a respective departments. Even I can divide them in respective whether this is a developer doing the job versus an IT team or security doing the job. So I can have appropriate labeling in place. And finally, industry standards are also must, right? So whether if I'm using the payment related something, obviously the customer information along with the debit cards, the credit card are very uh, uh, from the leakage per se. I think it should not be leaked from the databases or anything of that sort. So want to make sure that appropriate restrictions are in place before we uh, provide an access. So right labeling classification is the first step of preventing the leakage. Data handling, I think we pretty much talked about these terms and terminologies, but which tools we are using, I think they are clearly giving out here, supporting the security standards, HSM versus KMS. and how do you um, retain this from the backup. And collect and retain is absolutely for intent purpose, that because we want to, obviously, if something is purely wiped out or something is inadvertently deleted, you want to restore it from backup, so want to have that available. Masking for something which is very really critical is important. The way I said, the credit card numbers and even the debit card numbers and lot of information. So if you see, the they are clearly calling out with the examples as well, and practical example is for the databases, HTTPS. So this is how part of it. Okay, if you follow this strategy, how do you prevent the sensitive information from getting leaked? This is what you have to follow. First, we covered principles and what you have to take care of. Then in this module, we are covering how you secure that, which tools you have to use that. Okay, access control, multi-factor authentication, API is what you are looking at from a permissioning and rotating these. And on example, if you see, can access what kind of the data. Okay, so by default, if I'm taking example of data analyst with a specific role, they can access customer developer use to authenticate your pipeline changes. So depending upon who you are, whether you are collaborator, whether you are just doing your part, the access mechanism is very important. Auditing. What should I use? Alerts, attempts to sensitive information outside your working or non-working hours. So that is how I can do. Azure Monitor helps me in getting that. Our AI ML will help me getting the unusual uh, whatever is being. So basically, right from creating strategy to the monitoring and detecting that we are covering. And at the end, we are clearly talking about it's not about just we have to follow a DevSecOps and secure coding practice vulnerability managements. So in and out, what I'm trying to say here is we are following a secure way of developing and releasing our apps and to comply with our industry standards. This gives us a secure score. So the our next topic, which I'm going to show you, is on the this only from which tool we are using basically for our how do I monitor whether this particular scanning is done codes, so that we have the available defender is the tool which you are going to use from an Azure, which will integrate with our different DevOps environment and gives a single view of how we are seeing this from industry per se, how we are protecting our data, all and everything we can take care from that particular one single dashboard. Okay, again, employee awareness, I think this is something which you are trying to implement. They are just giving you how you do that. Okay, so first part, if you see, while we were labeling what strategy you should follow, is what we have seen, right? So in the previous, embarrass the DevSecOps, securing, how you do monitor awareness, and finally how you protect your leakage of information by using right tools. So again, this is more theoretical. The wherever I could find that you should have your labs done, I think I've already provided the links for that, so you can go and actually try those labs out. And finally, you should be aware of these terminologies, because in exam there will be 10 to 15% of questions on this particular module, the way we have seen from our agenda, right? So if you see the agenda, 16% is what they say. So you can say 10 to 15% surely will be there. Okay. Now coming to our last topic, which is on automating security and compliance scanning. Now, first thing is you should be aware of, as I said, the advanced security session, which we did earlier, which is an exam section. So I've covered in depth each permissioning, what the security means, like how you will enable those security features in your GitHub. Everything is covered in that exam. Please go and watch that video for advanced security for GitHub. Even though that was for exam, I covered everything practically. So you should be able to follow me for the GitHub advanced security, and even what you should follow for code scanning, secret scanning, and then also dependent bot alerts, how you close them, and finally also trying the code QL. Okay, so code QL also example I have taken there. So you can just go and refer to those particular session. So now moving to the last topic in automate security and compliance. So again, I want to remind you this. The reason I'm showing you Defender for Cloud is because whatever is required for this session, or I would say the section last, I'm just moving ahead fast. This I pretty much covered in your advanced uh, GitHub Advanced Security. Okay, so you can really see this code QL in the action with the live labs. So please refer to the GitHub Advanced Security session, which I did earlier for the exam. And now the only topic which is left for us in this particular is Defender for Cloud DevOps Security. Okay, so let's move to that topic. Now, with that in mind, what is the look and feel of? I think I will show you in the how you do the labs on this, but I think this is how the look and feel of uh, this Defender for Cloud looks like. You will have add environment. So it supports, first of all, what it supports. Obviously, it supports Azure, it supports AWS, it supports Google, it supports GitHub, Azure DevOps, and GitLab. As I said, DevSecOps is not about the development and pipelining. It is also about the which loads which we are going to implement. So hence, cloud providers are equally important while you take care of security to like complete DevSecOps lifecycle. Okay, so this particular obviously it is not free. You have to pay for this as a license, and Defender for Cloud will then allow you to have a GitHub or Azure DevOps added as an environment. Once you add the environment, it will show you what kind of subscriptions you have and what kind of connectors. Now connectors is, again, go back to GitHub app. Okay, so example of the when you add your GitHub connection, the GitHub app is actually created and gives a privilege limited access what is required for you to pull the data. Okay, so this is the practical use of how enterprise integration works. Okay, so while you see these GitHub connections, you will realize that GitHub app is actually being configured. And also while giving you instructions in the lab, I will show you that that is it exactly creating that. Similarly for Azure DevOps, it will create a service connection which will fetch the write the data and providing access only to what it requires to pull the data. Okay. And this is just, I will pause here, just see look and feel of this, and I will move ahead. Okay, so this is the first page. While you create the environment, then you have to go to this DevOps security. Okay, then once you click on the DevOps security, you will see this page. It will show you what are the code findings. It will show you infrastructure. I think I should increase this if possible. Let me see. Yeah, better now. So code findings, infrastructure as code, secret findings, and dependency findings. Okay, now also it will give you what you have checked. Out of 133, you have just covered 4. GitHub out of 152. See, this is how we will measure ourselves against our security standards which we are implemented. And if you clearly see, it is giving you exactly what you should know as a dashboard, right? These are the dependencies which are at fault. These are the secrets which you need to be fixing. This is infrastructure code findings which are not correct. These are the code related things which, so this is what I need before I can actually fix this and get out of box. So this is very useful tool to actually try it out and then add your environment and make sure you understand every bit of the security which is not at present working or in red, and then try to fix it. Something which is green, that means you already covered off. Something which is red is really deadly, requiring your attention. Yellow is also requiring, but I think it can wait for some time. Now what it gives you, as I said, is this code secrets dependencies. Similarly, it also provides you visibility of environments, which I already talked about this, right? Now, to give you, I will show you this lab, which you can try on your own. Now, bare minimum, where it is available and how you have to get this done. You have to understand what kind of permissioning you have to give it, because once you give permission, this is on the connector. Okay, so make sure what the connector is, and they have also clearly mentioned that whether this particular foundational is by basic, defender is where you have to buy the permissioning. So at every stage, that means Azure, for Azure DevOps, they have given what is the prerequisites. Just click on these connectors, they will provide you the details. Similarly, for say GitHub Advanced, if Azure is, it's covered to some extent in the both foundational and defender. Something is only available in defender, correct? So make sure you have to enable these feature sets while you are connecting to the different. Now similarly, this was for Azure DevOps, they have given for GitHub, GitLab. So this is what the prerequisites, just to make you understand that what you're going to try create in a defender. You want to connect to the environment, what kind of permissions I will need. Then you can come and actually create, or I would say onboard. So say suppose I want to onboard my GitHub environment. Okay. Now I will also open one more for Azure DevOps environment. I will open one more for GitLab environment. Okay. So let's look one by one. This is for Azure DevOps. This is for GitLab, correct? So let me, I think, connect back. Yeah, to one of them. So for Azure DevOps, okay, it gives you step-by-step instructions. Click on add environment, configure access, because it is going to create a connection with the service principal. uh, how it want you want an access, whether on repository versus an organization, and it gives you the step-by-step instructions. So just follow this and connect it to your Azure DevOps. Similarly for GitLab, it gives you prerequisites. You need a ultimate license. Okay. Then you connect your GitLab environment. What you will need is to configure access. This is nothing but the connector. Authorize you. It will ask you for groups which you need to be auto discovered, and provide only the permissions to that group. Remember, this is where you are actually not only creating the identity, you are creating that principle to provide access, limited access to that what is required for pulling that environment information, because this is more of a dashboard and giving you the whole lot of things to take care of for your GitLab environment. So just follow this step by step. I think it is pretty much everything you need to do. Okay. Similarly, coming back to the access, let me come back. So this is what the labs you will follow for each and every environment. Okay. Now again, refer to the advanced security session done earlier. I will show you this as well, like what we covered. This was an exam which I covered in the last year. Okay. So this, we have covered what advanced security components are there, dependency graph, code scanning, demo, all are with the demos. Okay. So that is where I have requested you to just go back and refer to this, because this will help you to make sure that you understand and uh, end to end. Okay. And we covered most of this as a what is required for this security session of your AZ400 exam. Okay. So that's all for this session. Thanks for listening.